Besides the signs, the planets, and the houses, another important part of the chart is the aspects. Aspects show how the parts of our psyche, the planets and signs, interact and how they influence each other, or how they don't. Usually located in the middle of the chart, the aspects visually show the geometric relationships planets make in the sky from our perspective here on Earth. These aspects represent the flow of communication and interaction between two or more planets in the chart, and how those planets influence each other. Aspects are also visually shown in an aspect table. Most programs and websites will include these. Life happens in cycles. Astrology is an attempt at understanding the fundamentals behind all of life and said cycles. For example, the zodiac going from Aries to Pisces represents an important cycle. Each aspect in the chart is a part of a cycle between two planets. This cycle begins at the conjunction and ends at the next conjunction. One way to easily visualize these cycles is through the phases of the moon and the sun-moon cycle. The chart is 360 degrees. An aspect between two planets is a certain degree distance that they are from each other. I think of the movement of the planets as a clock with many hands, all moving at different speeds. When the hands on a clock connect with one another at certain intervals, we find that to be a significant time. 3:15, for example, or quarter till. Well, when two or more planets connect in certain ways, it is significant in astrology. The main aspects are the conjunction, the sextile, the square, the trine, and the opposition. They come from the basic relationships between signs in the zodiac. For example, the square comes from the relationship between modalities, fixed, mutable, and cardinal signs. They all square each other. The conjunction is obviously the same sign. The trine is shown through the elements of each sign. All air signs trine each other, for example. The sextile shows the masculine yang and feminine yin signs and their relationships. And finally, the opposition is shown through two opposite signs and their entirely opposing energies. If you have seen my dignities and debilities video, you will notice similar relationships. All of astrology comes back to these fundamental relationships between the signs and the flow of energy between them. Aspects are generally considered good or bad, and I say that in quotes, and in modern terms, they are considered, challenge or growth aspects, and then the potential talent and beneficial aspects. And the main difference that I have found between hard and easy aspects, or quote, good and bad aspects, is that the harder aspects, the square and opposition, force themselves into one's psyche and life. You cannot avoid their lessons of growth, whether internal strife or through external people and sources. This is also their gift in a weird way. They force growth and change. The, quote, good aspects, on the other hand, the sextile trine, tend to provide the potential, but one must actively work to get it. You can't just sit back and expect your potential to work itself. This is the sextile and trine, like I said, and also the conjunction, too. The main lesson or point of the aspects, in my opinion, are as follows. The conjunction, it synthesizes the planets involved. They will always influence each other in the psyche, whether that means one overpowering the other, or a bounce from one to the other inside the self. Ultimately is about combining the energies involved and starting a new cycle for those parts of your psyche. In the personal chart, it means that your life embodies that part of the cycle. You are meant to bring forth the potential of what those two planets can do together. It can also mean a feeling of confusion and being stuck, not knowing how to start. The sextile is an easy flow of communication between two planets. Capitalize on that. The potential laid out at the conjunction in the cycle is asking to start being made into something of substance in the psyche. But one must act on this potential. A feeling of things building, but again, one must capitalize on that energy. The square, 90 degrees, is a turning point, a point of stress and questioning. Two parts of the psyche are at odds with each other and need to find common ground. Usually, a square is an internal struggle in one's psyche, which can affect our external world. But something or many things must be worked out internally. The two parts of the psyche must learn to be okay with each other and operate to their best, even on their own. Again, this usually manifests internally in one's psyche. Many, quote, negative mental and emotional states can be shown through squares in a person's chart. This is usually the hardest aspect, and it forces growth of some kind. It forces action. And again, it's sort of a turning point. The trine is the ultimate potential. This is the easiest flow of energy between the parts of one's psyche. And this can mean a lazy approach to that potential. Easy means we aren't being pushed to activate these parts of our psyche's potential to work together for something greater. When something is easy, we tend not to try. The opposition is when two planets are at odds with each other, so 180 degrees. Their energies are at opposite, and as with all opposites, the lessons and growth are about finding a balance between the two parts of one's psyche. Oppositions usually manifest through other people in our life, whether how they act towards us or how we act towards them. But regardless, this inclusion of another person forces us to find that balance or suffer in the process. One can suffer alone in their own head, but when we include another, they force accountability on some level. When the balance is found with an opposition, then we stop attracting people into our lives to force us to learn that balance through hardship and negative interactions, etc. There are minor aspects that divide the circle up more. They include the semi-sextile, semi-square, and conjunct, and many more. As you can see, it is breaking up the circle into different amounts. And so like if you divide 360 by 10, if you divide 360 by 15, etc., etc. Without going into too much detail, these more minor aspects represent steps in between the major aspects, steps in the cycle. So you can kind of guess like a semi-sextile is a step in between a conjunction and a sextile. And so it's a step in between those two that helps benefit the sextile and helps push towards the sextile. Just like a semi-square represents the same but for a square, etc. So there's smaller steps that build towards the larger steps, but understand those larger steps, those main aspects, and you can then understand the rest of them. You'll understand the flow of that whole cycle. When people talk about aspects, one of the big things that's brought up is the orb. And orbs are simply the area of effect that an aspect has. And usually it is between 5 and 10 degrees, and astrologers each have their own preference for exact orbs for each planet. But generally, the closer an aspect is within the orb of degrees, so the closer it is to exactly 90 degrees for a square, or exactly 120 degrees for a trine, or exactly 0 degrees for a conjunction, the stronger the effect is of that aspect between those two planets. When looking at aspects to minor planets and more obscure asteroids, I would encourage using a tighter orb, just 1 to 2 degrees maybe. Otherwise, you will have too many aspects to decipher. The orb also provides a window of time for an aspect to activate when looking at transits, for example. Two very slow-moving planets will maintain their aspects together during a transit for a lot longer, allowing for a longer period in which the aspects, and in turn those parts of our psyche are activated. A moon transit might last a few hours, while a Uranus transit could last up to a year with retrograde, for example. Another part of aspects is that they can form patterns in the chart, the aspect patterns. And 3 planets in a triangle formation all trining each other is called a grand trine, for example. You have the hexagon, mystic rectangle, the yod, stellium, etc., etc. There's many, and people put significance on these, but really it's just many aspects all at once. These can be more active in a person's life because the formation has a higher chance of activating by transit the more planets are involved. So the hexagon, for example, which is 6 planets, has a higher chance of being activated by transit, for example. When one planet is hit, the rest of the planets in the aspect pattern are also hit. Beyond just a planet in a sign in a house, aspects are another way we get uniqueness in the chart and individualism. 2 people who have Mars in the sign of Sagittarius, for example, might have similar motives and use their energy in similar ways. But if one has that Mars square to their moon, for example, that person's Mars will always be flavored and influenced by the moon in their psyche. Their energy might express through the emotional self more, even though they have Mars in a fire sign. This can manifest as emotional anger, for example, or a softer application of one's physical drive and energy, all while the other person wouldn't. Almost like a modifier. It doesn't change the planet in a sign entirely, but it modifies it depending on the other planet involved in aspect, and which specific aspect. Another thing to consider is specific asteroids and minor planets in aspect to major planets in one's chart. Again, remember to use a tight orb here. There is a plethora of asteroids and minor planets, and each one has its own unique and specific meaning in the chart. When in aspect to a major planet or point in the chart, it will influence more. This can help people understand themselves more. Check to see if you have an asteroid or 2 in tight aspect to a major planet in your chart. This might help explain a more unique and individual aspect of yourself and your psyche and your personality. Thanks for watching. Take care.